I'm so excited to be back with Linda Tellington-Jones. I'm Mandy Pretty, and we're continuing on our very fun, talk story basically about your amazing life. I think we left off with your different travels in California and where you lived in Hemet, Rolling Hills, Hemet, Los Osos, and then up to Badger. And one thing we didn't really touch on during that time was how you got introduced to endurance riding, because you held some amazing records and did some amazing things in conditioning and just competing with your horses with you and Wint. I think you were pretty ahead of your time. Well, you've always been ahead of your time, but especially ahead of your time in endurance riding in the 50s and 60s. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Well, how it all started is when we came to Chadwick School from Puerto Rico, where Went we'd gone because he had broken bones from various accidents and wanted to be in warm weather. So we went there for, I think, a year and a half. And then he wanted to contribute something back to students. And he really was a wonderful teacher, very creative teacher. And so we went to Chadwick School, and at Chadwick School, Wentworth taught English and math and creative writing. And I was the senior girls dorm mother and taught 8th grade social studies. And there was a private stable at the school. Chadwick School is a private prep school in Rolling Hills, California. And Went had the idea that he wanted me to be known in the United States, because I came from Canada. I wasn't known at all. And so he had the idea of buying a horse, an Arabian horse, that would be really, really good at endurance riding and getting me known. And so did I tell you already? Did we talk about driving to Iowa and going to the Doyle Arabian Ranch? The Doyles are well known for their horses. I told you that, right?
I don't think you did, but I do recall. I just know from past knowledge, but I don't think we talked about that. Like, why endurance riding? Because it wasn't that you were known for endurance riding in your youth. Do you know what sort of drew him to that?
Yes, because it was, it was just a budding sport in those days. There had been one Tevis Cup ride, 100-mile in one-day ride through the Rocky Mountains, ending up in Auburn, California. And because of Went's background in the cavalry, he was very interested and knowledgeable about the remount horses and about the Vermont 100-mile endurance rides that they did. And he wanted to also explore the concept of interval training with horses. And so we became acquainted with the various breeders of Arabian horses, the breeders who've been around for many years. And one of those breeders were the Doyles in Iowa. So we were in correspondence with them and drove from California, from Chadwick School, with a trailer, and went to choose a long 3-year-old from their herd. And so we chose Bent Galita because of her breeding and her conformation. And she was barely halter broken. She'd never been in a trailer, and we wanted to load her ourselves, but the Doyles, because they were the breeders, wanted to do this, and so they tranquilized her to put her in the trailer, which is not a good idea. But we really didn't have a choice. And so we headed from Iowa to California. And when we got to Redding, California, it was a really hot day. And we stopped to gas up, and she did not look good. And so we unloaded her, and she unloaded and actually fell down, just lay there. Her temperature was 108, which is really, really bad. And so we, for like an hour, I can remember like it was yesterday, just running the hose over her, just cooling her off. And so I think took about an hour, and she started to recover. This is long before TTouch. We could have done a lot faster. And her temperature went back to normal. We reloaded her and brought her home. And it was really interesting because one of the things that we believe, and it certainly has proven true with many of my endurance horses since then, is you want a horse who doesn't have, we wanted horses that didn't have much previous experience with people in terms of being started in ways that, we didn't want. And so she really wondered if I'd ever be able to ride her. She was so reactive and so skittish. And one of the things, Mandy, you may remember me, or you may have heard from Robin over the years, what I did with her was follow the Native American concept that you can start a horse best in the dark. I don't know where this idea came from. It's something that read somewhere. And so I found that I could work with her really well in the dark. Of course, there are no distractions. That's one thing, which is really nice. It's kind of like us being here on Zoom together, as opposed to being together in a room where there's so many different distractions. I love this way of communicating, very direct. And so I did have a really wonderful experience with that mirror, and we'll see pictures of me ground driving her because, as you remember, I had already learned to start horses without ever bucking, ever being afraid. And that was the whole concept.
Did you tell me once that like 10 p.m. was your favorite time to work with her?
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe it's sort of that sort of not sensory deprivation, but certainly reduced the amount that they have to take in.
Yeah, exactly. And it bonds you as a connection that occurs.
So when did you start? Like how long, do you remember how long it took to get her going under saddle?
It was standard in those days. I probably took a month to prepare her for lunging, and just really, of course, a lot of quiet grooming that we were really careful about. And one of the things that was interesting in those days, I don't know why, I mean, when I think about it, she had really long whiskers, like would be normal, right? And it was not possible to trim her whiskers. Now, today it's forbidden in many places, thank heaven. But boy, she was so touchy around her mouth. And if you think about it, today, what we realize, like anything around the mouth, we can affect the emotions. And you couldn't touch her mouth. To groom her even, she was sensitive around the mouth. I mean, today, no problem. It'd be the first thing I would start on her face, and just quietly work around her mouth. And we could have shortened that time by so much by overcoming the fear. But we didn't know it. So it just took longer. Did a lot of ground driving of her around the Chadwick School property, up and down the hills, and before I ever rode her. And one of the things that I've written about in other places was an experience that, whoa, I really learned to control my own reactivity, because one night, and we lived in the dorm. I was dorm mother, so we had a house right there on the property. And one night I got a phone call, and the horses, other school horses, not school horses, but horses owned by students, we had like 3 or 4 boarding there, had gotten out, and they were down the road, like off the property. So, and Bint Galita had been in a stall that night. And so I got on her bareback in the dark. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. There was some moon, which is great. And I was kind of like, here I have to get up, and I was not in a very good mood. And she really reacted to that. And I thought, okay. take some nice deep breaths
Mm.
and calm yourself. And she responded immediately to that. And it's the first time that she'd been like written just kind of with a purpose, not just carefully written. So it was great. And that was, we prepared her at Chadwick School, and that's when I think in 59, we then went into partnership with a man whose son had been riding with me. His son went to Chadwick School, and he was really interested in doing something with horses, had no idea. And so he decided he wanted to buy a thoroughbred farm and breed yearlings for the sales. And so we went on as partners in that project. And we wound up with 90 thoroughbred broodmares, 2 thoroughbred stallions, and a small herd of Arabian horses.
And this is in Hemet then? This is, you moved from Chadwick School to Hemet?
To Hemet, yes. Yep.
So had you started conditioning Bent Galita at that point for races, or just gotten her going under saddle solidly?
She was just going well under saddle. But when we moved to Hemet, that's when we began preparing her for the Tevis Cup ride. And so I would get up really early in the morning and start riding before light, because it was so hot in Hemet in the summer.
So your first endurance ride was going to be the Tevis with her?
First was the Tevis Cup ride, yes. And
100 miles in the Sierra Nevadas.
Yes, 100-mile in the Sierra Nevadas. And so we, and I'm trying to think when we built the first really special 4-horse trailer. That's crazy that I can't remember that.
Well, I was going to ask what the trailers, I don't know if this is an ignorant question, what the trailer looked like that you picked her up in Iowa. Was it like a small stock horse trailer, like a 2-horse straight load, or?
It was a 2-horse straight load, small. I can't remember. It was a standard trailer that everybody had there. Yeah. And that's when Wentz, said,
Realized.
as an engineer, he said, "This is crazy. We're going to design one." And that's when he designed a 4-horse trailer where the horses rode backwards, could loaded in from the side and unloaded straight out the back ramp.
Yeah.
On ramp.
I mean, they usually prefer to ride backwards anyways, if they've given the choice.
Absolutely. If horses are turned loose in a stock trailer, they'll most often turn around to ride backwards. And actually that the experience that we had, because what we did was measure horses' pulse and respiration while they were riding to show the difference and the reduction of stress. We didn't talk about stress at that point, but that's what it was, to see how much better horses handled riding backwards. And that was actually, I can't remember what the heck I did with that book, but every 4 years there was this huge, as big as my biggest books behind me, was a book that was called L'Année Hippique, and it was a yearbook that was in 4 languages. And actually that experience with designing that trailer is written in that book. And I can't remember what year it was.
Wow.
Should try to find that.
Yeah. So you did the Tevis with Bent Galita before the Jim Shoulders ride?
Yes. You see, Tevis was her first ride, and I took the trailer and a couple of students, and we went up ahead of time and camped in the various checkpoints on Tevis and rode the whole trail. And Went was so organized. We have cars, and Shannon Wiles, who wrote the book Strike Along Trot, and it's written in there about the ride. They were 3x5 cards, and every 5 miles I had notes. My intention, where I wanted to be at that point on the ride, how I wanted to ride it, what were the elements that we had to be careful about. I mean, when I think about it, this is so far ahead of the time. That was Tellington. The fact that set an intention, and that's what we did. And so I had a couple of experiences I really want to tell you all about. While we were camping up there, we had, this is before you had these like fancy pens that we know, on endurance rides you set up. So I just took a rope and roped off an area. I can remember, where were we? I think we were at Forest Hill on the trail. And no, it's when we went to the start of the ride in Lake Tahoe. And I was camped there. And I slept out on the ground, and Bint Galita actually lay down and slept beside me. I wrote about this in one book. It was very, very cool. And just at dawn, she got up and walked over to the edge, and it was a really big area that I just roped off. And she put her head like under the rope and just lifted up and walked down the trail, down the road, actually. And I called her, and she came back, and I just lifted the fence, and she came back. I mean,
I mean, it speaks to your relationship with her. You spent so much time with her.
exactly. And that's what endurance riding can do, and especially when you sleep with horses. Just like when you take your dog camping the first time. I've taken a dog that was really not very, like a come down the road dog that I hadn't had very long. That was Jessie, and took her camping. I took her to a week-long training for horses, and she slept, and we slept in tents at that training, a big, huge tent. And that completely changed her. And within Lita, that experience of sleeping with us really, really changed her. And Mandy, as you know, like in 1976, I was the international coordinator for the Great American Horse Race, which was a bicentennial race. It was from Syracuse, New York to Sacramento, California, across the country. And the people and everybody, slept in it right there in their campers with the horses in the trailers. And one of the reports was that when the horses got home and they were back in the stable and their people were back in the house, they got depressed. Really interesting. Yeah.
They must have also slept in tents on the Great American Horse Race, because that experience my parents had crewing is the reason I didn't camp as a child.
What do you mean? Oh, because they didn't want
to camp. So miserable. Apparently the weather was so miserable, they were packing up and setting up in rain a lot of the time.
Well, and a tornado at one time. That was in Hank.
So back to the Tevis, how was that first experience with Bint? Because I mean, that's a huge ride to do. I mean, obviously, clearly was meticulous in his planning and preparations. So I'm sure you both went in prepared and conditioned to do 100 miles, but that's still a huge undertaking in one day.
Not really, because we had so well prepared for it in terms of, you just do like the interval trainings, and I would train a couple of times a week. It'd be galloping for 10 miles, and then maybe at least once a week, a 40-mile ride mostly at the trot. And yeah, over a couple of months. We only did about 2 months. And so on the Tevis, I just followed the plan, and I wound up in 6th place. Isn't that interesting? On my first ride. And then Wint was so, enthusiastic and pleased. He decided we were going to turn around, and the next big ride in the United States was in Oklahoma. It was their first year. It was the Oklahoma Jim Shoulders, and Jim Shoulders was a very famous cowboy. I can't remember what rodeo cowboy. And so it was called the Jim Shoulders 100-mile in one day endurance ride. And we hauled back there, and as always, was really prepared. And I just over days rode pieces of the trail each day on these carts. We
Hmm.
should actually get Shannon to send us pictures of some of, she's retained all of these as a historian for that endurance ride.
Well, I've never actually been to Oklahoma except grounded in Tulsa during a lightning storm at the airport. I mean, the terrain must be, I mean, quite different from the Tevis. So was it like a cakewalk compared to, going?
It was flat. Well, here's the rub. So the organizers planned to, because of the heat, they planned to start at 2 in the afternoon, believing there was a full moon. The organizers made a mistake. That was the dark of the moon. And because I had ridden the whole trail, I knew where in the road, some of the roads were rutty, some of them had deep ditches. I actually had marked all of these places where it was rough. And that's the rough ground. It wasn't like Tevis where you're going on mountain trails and scrambling over Cougar Rock. And really, we should put some pictures of I don't have a picture of me going over Cougar Rock, but it's really rough, up and down, huge climbs and descents, right?
Well, I think we have a great photo of someone using one of the Lariat Liberty neck rings over Cougar Rock.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Mhm.
So anyway, it was flat. So now they find out at the last minute there's no moon, and everybody else is freaked out because they were going to have to be riding in the dark. Now you have to understand, we rode and practiced in the dark for the endurance riding. And we had really, you go out at night and you just, when people say that horses can't see in the dark, I've had people say that, is that not my experience, because I remember one night training and just flying at a flying trot. This was years later when I was working one of the Hungarians, and it was after midnight, and my horse like put on the brakes. I mean, stop dead in your tracks. There were a couple of other riders with me, and I turned my flashlight on, and there was a huge ditch that water had opened up, and we would have fallen right into this ditch because I sure couldn't see it, and my horse did. And so anyway, it was not a problem for me on the Jim Shoulders ride. What was a problem, and there weren't, certainly not the endurance riders that we have today. And so the other thing that I forgot to tell you, oh my God. So in those days, we weren't, for some reason, we left Bent Galita in her paddock, like a electric wire fence, not in the stall, by the trailer. And we were sleeping in a hotel. Can't quite understand that when I think about that today.
Is this while you were training or during the ride?
No, just in the few days before. We went there like probably 5 days before to ride the trail segment by segment. We go out in the morning, and Bint Galita is standing there with her head down, her eyes like defocused, her front feet like spread out, couldn't move. Oh my gosh. When we looked at her, we thought, what has happened? And when we got closer, we could smell she was skunked. So we went to the local store. We were kind of out in the boonies there, and got gallons of tomato juice, and washed her down with tomato juice, and she was fine. That was like in the morning. The race started at 2 in the afternoon. And then what I had to deal with once in the middle of the night was this crazy bunch of friends of one of the local competitors trying to run me off the road in a truck. But again, it didn't freak me out because I knew the ditches. I mean, literally every 5 miles. So, that wasn't a big deal. And I was so far, I finished 6 hours ahead of the second place horse.
Well, and you set a record, right? That held for years.
The record, it was 13 and a half hours. And that record in that endurance Jim Shoulders ride was broken 7 years later by the legendary Pat Fitzgerald. And it was, so not only did I win the first place, but also best condition with that mare. And the other thing that was a record, which is really hard, if you know the endurance world today, you think, are you kidding? Nobody at that point had competed in 200-mile endurance rides in one season. And now, I mean, you know, many of them, I think Donna Fitzgerald rode at least 10, probably one majority of them. So it
Well,
became common.
And it was your second endurance ride ever.
Right. Yeah.
You and the horse's second endurance ride ever. So that's pretty impressive.
Well, and that's thanks to Went
Yeah.
Tellington, his amazing military background, his cavalry background, his engineering background, and his organization was incredible. And I was, you know, I really rode along with it. I have to tell you, I really enjoyed the training and the connection with the horses, but I wasn't out to win. I was out to have a good time with my horse, like always. And it was without Went, I wouldn't have pushed to win that at all.
So then after Oklahoma, you went back home to Hemet. Is that right?
From Oklahoma, yeah, it had to be him.
And then you were there for a few years?
We were in Hemet, I think, 2 years, and then decided the racehorse business is not what we're interested in. And that's when we found a piece along the coast of California, inland on the coast west of San Luis Obispo. And that was
It's so beautiful, the Central Coast.
Oh, it was gorgeous. And I can't remember, it had to be a leased piece of property from the government, because that was part of this huge, huge ranch. And I don't remember how that was. And that's where we established the Pacific Coast Equestrian Research Farm. And I mean, Went was amazing. And I have some of the newsletters that we put out, because we had a research farm newsletter that went to 20 countries, and subscribers in 20 countries in the 60s. And I have somewhere, I have to try to find this one picture. It's of a veterinarian from, I'm pretty sure he was either South Korea or or Vietnam. He was a veterinarian who had been subscribing to our Research Farm newsletter and came to visit us. And we have a picture with him, and went looking at one of the things that we did was grow along the fence line. Oh my gosh, now I forgot what you call it.
Was it comfrey or different herbs?
Comfrey. And horses, we grew it under the fence so that horses could actually sometimes nibble it, and you just take pieces of it. And of course, we also used it for other things. And that's when Went started drying sea kelp. And we should really put up some of those pictures of the marketing that we did for it, because it was the first sea kelp marketed in the United States for horses.
Well, and I've got to imagine that in the 60s, it was pretty far out to feed your horses lots of supplements and herbs. Like, it's pretty normal now, but was it not a bit like unusual?
You would be amazed if we could dig up, if I would love to know what supplements my riding teacher, Mrs. Alice Metherall, Greaves Metherall, had. She had this huge bin.
Really?
Mixture of herbs. It was, no, I don't.
Oh, wow. Well, that's very interesting. And it might be also like so many horses were kept if they were kept in stables and things, I guess it would be knowledge that you need to give them access to essentially things they might have foraged 100 years earlier on their own.
I'd like to know what was in Went's head. And I think we should really think about this, because you see, in the United States, that could have been true. That in those days, in the 60s, supplements certainly they weren't on the market like now. And sea kelp was not anywhere on the market. What was on the market was like different types of possibilities. We should go back. They were just starting to market then the wormers that we've been into for years, deciding which wormers that we would give our horse. And well, remind me to talk about that when we talk about the research farm after, because we did a lot of stuff studying the effect of different wormers on horses. We also developed different ways of feeding them hay at various levels, what the problem was if the horses were eating off the ground and picking up parasites, because we were really into parasite control in the 60s. And oh my gosh, I mean, developed these, what we call little red wonders. And it's very possible that when you publish these like blogs, whatever they're going to be, that we'll have somebody come forward and say, my mother ordered that from you, because he developed these little red wonders that would go into hot horse manure. You would just cover the manure pile with a tarp and keep it wet, and they would
compost it
into good fertilizer way faster. And I would go out, I remember collecting you'd pick 100 worms and put them in this little box, cardboard box. And I remember sending them off to Canada and all over the United States. And then we had this other brew that he brewed up of vitamins and minerals that was active brew. And he was just an amazing inventor.
Did you plant anything else besides comfrey under the paddock lines, or was it just comfrey and it was just the horses could choose if they wanted it, sort of like early Zuma pharmacology or whatever? You're letting the animals choose if they needed it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, that's pretty neat. So did you do many other big rides with Bint?
No, because that's when I started training horses for other people. And when we were at Los Osos, because Went was writing articles for Western Horsemen, and at one point we had a syndicated column that was in 8 horse magazines. The Arabian Horse Journal partnered with us in actually publishing the first, it was a mimeograph copy of the endurance ride manual. And I've got to unpack one. I still have one. And at one point on eBay, Shannon Weil found a copy, and they wanted like $130 for it or something. Now that endurance ride manual, let me think if I get this right. No, part of what was in that manual, the very first that we wrote at Hemet was, I think it's massage and physical therapy for the athletic horse. I have to look for it. And it was the work that Went had interpreted from my grandfather, Will Cawood, that he had learned from his Russian gypsies who were his grooms when he was an American training in Moscow and St. Petersburg racehorses, and won that prestigious award in 1905 for the most winners of the season, and that he attributed to work on the body. That was that massage and physical therapy for the athletic horse. And that was then turned into one chapter in the Endurance and Trail Ride Manual. Where is it? It's right here. I haven't unpacked all my books yet. We've only started to unpack, but I know there's here. Here, it's this one. This is Endurance and Competitive Trail Riding. And by Wentworth, Tellington, and Linda. This is the second copy. It was original Wentworth and Linda Tellington, and this is Wentworth, Tellington, and Linda Tellington-Jones. Yeah. So it's like, wow, it's really fun for me to think of this, looking back.
You had a pretty, and you did a bit of endurance riding with Hungarians. Some of the Hungarian horses. I've seen some photos, I think.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And one year we took Margaret Besnier, Countess Margaret Besnier. She rode with us. And this is the year that nobody else has ever taken 4 junior riders through and finished with all 4. And we finished in 15th place, crossing the finish line in Auburn, California in 15th place. And the last one is a 12-year-old. She's, and the others are 15 and 16-year-olds. So it's really, really fun too.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And Shannon put this together. This was actually like a little, instead of having flowers, she took these tin cans and made different pictures. And on this particular one, it was for the opening of the Endurance Museum that she is heading the committee for preparing an endurance museum in Auburn, California. So this is really fun.
So did you, after you stopped endurance riding Bint Gallita, did you breed her, or what happened to Bint Gallita?
Actually, and she had a number of wonderful foals, and one of them was Jackpot, and many other riders rode these horses. Richard, gosh, and I can't remember the names of people now, which is
That's fair.
Yeah, really. Richard Treffel, but Richard wasn't the first. Dick Treffel. Yes, rode Jackpot. And then we bred her several times to the top endurance horse, another stallion. And we have to write this in here because I can't remember the horse's name. So, and then eventually she was bought by another center when I went to Europe and shut down, the West Wind Hungarian Horse Farm after a school. Then Bint Gallita went to Countess Besnier to her ranch in Montana. And then she was sold to an Arabian horse breeder in California, which is really nice. And yeah, but what was interesting about Bint Gallita is we bred, we had the Hungarian horses, and that's a whole, I'd like to talk about what we did with those horses. But one of them was Hungarian Brado, and we bred Bint Gallita to Hungarian Brado, and we pasture bred them. And the strangest thing is, if he was in a pasture with mares and Bint Gallita was in pasture in heat, that stallion would not breed another mare. And I tried to breed her to another Arabian at one point, Sheila Berrien's stallion that was imported from Poland. And Sheila was teasing her with a young gray stallion. And when they went to breed her to Bay Abbey, they had to hobble her and force breed her, and she aborted the foal. Isn't that interesting? And she was really, really conscious about what stallion she was mating with. Fascinating. Yep.
And you had a pretty interesting experience with her when she colicked. Where was that? Was that in Los Osos?
Holy moly. I mean, we have to talk about this. Thank you for bringing it up. Bint Gallita colicked at Chadwick School. After, I was already starting to prepare her for endurance. And she had one of these really, really terrible colics. And in those days, you didn't send the horse for surgery. Normally, like today, she would have gone to surgery to Davis in California. And
so was there only recourse? Like, was there Banamine then? Would they just tube them? Did they have much recourse?
So what was unusual about her, she had like this this green stuff from the food she was eating running out of her nose. And when they say, when you get to that point, I mean, there's nothing you can do. And I had a really great vet, Dr. Santos, and he was with her every day. We had her on a drip. And after about 4 days of this, he said, it's not working. We're not going to be able, we're not going to be able to save her. And so, of course, I was really sad, but I had an appointment for Dr. Santos to come, and he was on his way, and I brought her down from the stable down to our laundry room it's a school, in our home. And it was a really like a hot July day, and her temperature was subnormal. And I brought her down, and I took, like, we were endurance riding with these military saddles and using like wool blankets. They're folded in a special way. So I took this wool blanket and got it really hot and wrung it out and put it over her body to try to warm her up. And we weren't doing ears in those days, but intuitively, as she was standing there, and she wasn't going down, she was just standing there, and I started intuitively stroking her ears. And when I touched her ears, they were ice cold and soaking wet. And I remember just standing there, just not thinking, just quietly stroking from the base of the ear out to the tips of the ear, and like just waiting for him to come. And
You're just trying to keep her comfortable in her last,
I was saying goodbye. It's not like she didn't have, her pulse was like 80. I remember that really well, because of course we took pulses all the time because of endurance riding. And her respiration wasn't that high. It's not like at that point she was quiet, and no longer stuff coming out of her nose. It hadn't been. And suddenly I realized that, wait a minute, and she had an impaction. I didn't say that. I mean, she, that's why it was coming out her nose. And so suddenly I realized, wait a minute, her ears started to get warm and they got dry. And I just kept doing it intuitively. And suddenly she lifted her tail and defecated, and that was the end of the impaction. And I have to tell you, I mean, with Dr. Santos, we tried doing an enema with her, a water enema. Hadn't brought anything. And that was the end of the impaction. And that was 1958. And it wasn't until 1979 that I discovered why the ear TTouch had worked. I mean, we didn't call it TTouch, and the stroking of the ears had worked. And that's a whole other story. I was giving a presentation in 1979. I was riding an Arabian stallion in Axelschwung, Germany, for a one-day little local fair, where I was giving a workshop at this Arabian farm, and we took the stallion, and I was giving I was riding him with the training bit and riding through the labyrinth, and I was doing TTouch on his body. And so after the presentation, a veterinarian came up to me, and she asked me in German, like, with whom did I study acupuncture? And I said, I haven't studied acupuncture. And she said, well, how is it that you're following the meridians? And I said, I'm following my fingers, because I was doing these TTouches in long lines on the barrel of the horse. And I wasn't even doing ear TTouch at that point. So she invited me home. I had like 3 days before my next training. And so I went home with her, and I shared TTouch with her and the work. And that Sunday night, her husband, who's also a veterinarian, came home from giving the first presentation of ear acupuncture on horses in Paris. It was a vet conference in Paris. And so I told him about this, this ear stuff that I had intuitively done in 11 years earlier. And he said the reason it had worked is because around the base of the ear is a triple heater meridian, and it affects the digestive system, the respiratory system, and the reproductive system. And he said, and in the tip of the ear, there's a stomach point. And I said, well, so do you use that for colic? And he said, well, no, it doesn't work alone, actually, for colic. Mandy, I made the mistake of writing that in the newsletter. And one of our practitioners put out a really nice little chart showing that for colic, she misinterpreted it. You said press on the tip of the ear. Now, the reason that this is important, it doesn't work. It's the whole, it's like the base of the ear and the whole ear. Okay, so like another 10 years went by, and I was giving a talk at some expo in Oregon, and a vet came up to me and said, you know, I don't get it. I've watched your practitioners do ear TTouch on the horse for colic, and it worked. He said, when I try it, it does nothing. And I said, well, tell me exactly what you do. Well, I press the tip of the ear. And that's all he had heard. And he hadn't heard, and that's the same thing that was put out there. So if you've ever heard of this stuff with ear TTouch, it's I do this like right at the a little circle at the base and then a slide out to the tip. And in the beginning, Mandy, maybe you remember when you were really little, if a horse had colic, we would do it fast and hard. Actually, we found out you don't have to do it. Like, it's just if the horse is in a lot of pain, you can help to keep them like reduced pain while you're waiting for your vet. So, and we must remember when we talk about any of this stuff, any of the TTouch or like the ear TTouch, it's never a replacement for your vet. It's while you're waiting for your vet, if you can't get your vet, and we have many vets who will tell a person, that is when they used to go to visit the horse, they would tell them just start doing the ear work, we now call it ear TTouch, until I get there. It's a big problem now because in most places in the US, vets don't come anymore to you. You have to
Really?
no way.
Huh. I guess, yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. Our vets, we're lucky. We have several relationships with several local vets that are great. But, you know, we get every year, we have so many letters that come in with people that had seen ear TTouch and the belly lifts, and just either they were waiting for their vet or they were in a remote area, and they're just really are sure that it saved their horses' lives. And again, it's not to replace the vets, but sometimes it also gives you something calm and mindful to do. Because one of our vets has said that the whole idea of only walking your horses, you know, it can actually exhaust them depending on the reason for the colic. So it gives you another proactive thing to do that can really help without, you know, making it worse.
Yeah. And I have to tell you another colic story, and I should be talking about this on my.
Well, maybe we'll have to do that for another time, because I think we've sort of, I wanted to really focus on sort of, I mean, you have had done an amazing, you did so many amazing things with Vincolita and endurance riding. We could go on. The tentacles of all your amazing experiences and stories keep going, which I hope we'll continue to do in different episodes. But
well, good. Well, I do want to say, like, one of my great endurance horses was a horse named Elmira Rainbow from Basie Tankersley. And we went back to Washington area to choose a horse for endurance riding. She wanted.
Is this like Washington, D.C. or Washington State?
Yeah, sorry, D.C. Yeah. To the Tankersley Arabian Ranch. And I mean, she had hundreds of horses. And we had our choice of any horse that we wanted to use for endurance riding. And because we had so many articles out about it, and you know, because of my experience and Went's amazing ability. And so we chose a horse, Elmira Rainbow, who was 6 years old, and she had been attempted to start her as a 3-year-old by their trainer. And he gave up on her and turned her back in the herd to be a broodmare. And you couldn't touch her. She was incredibly like reactive to touching. So maybe we'll come back and talk about that in another another episode because I had an amazing, like, one-time experience that
Wow.
changed our relationship to trust.
I think we could do a whole episode on that.
And she won. I won a lot with her. She
Wow.
did really well. Yes, and not in the 100-mile, but in the 3-day rides
Hmm.
yeah, really fun.
Oh, wow. Well, I learned a lot every time. This is why we're doing this. You know, I hear bits and pieces throughout my entire life, but you've done so many things and it's just fun to get the details.
Well, and I have to add this in about endurance, and then we have to put some of the pictures in because then, of course, Countess Margaret Besnier started bringing horses to us, and I had always like 12 horses in training. And we did a lot in the Virginia 100-mile ride, and I want you to, they were wonderful horses, so we have to put some pictures in of them. And Brado, that's what I started to tell you.
Yeah.
The stallion, Hungarian Brado, we finished in the top 10 with Ernie Sanchez, who was riding one of our horses, and I was riding Brado in a Tevis Cup ride, top 10. And like 6 weeks later, I won the Gamblers Jumping Derby at the Oakland National Horse Show with, and also the pleasure class side saddle with Hungarian Brado. Really fun.
True all-rounder.
Yeah.
You don't see that, you know, in everything, not just horses. Things get so specialized now, you know. But that's pretty amazing.
It always does, but it's perhaps even more so now. But that was part of, we'll talk about our school because that's part of what our students had to do. They had to ride English, Western, ride at least a lower level dressage class and a competition. I get a 50% and jumping and eventing. They had to do it all.
That's very cool.
We'll talk about that.
I love it. Well, thank you, Linda. As always, this was very cool. I'm excited, and we will chat next time. We'll talk more about the school specifically. And I mean, we have so many great photos. I'll include the photos of the endurance riding because we definitely have some of you in Brado, lots of you in Vincolita. So I love it. Well, thank you. We'll talk later.
Really exciting.
Bye.
Share this with you.